Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Travis. Say hello.
Hello.
And we are joined tonight by Rachel Fulton Brown, Associate Professor of Medieval History at the University of Chicago, and the author of, among other things, Mary and the Art of Prayer.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So tonight we are getting together to talk about C.S. Lewis's poem "Readjustment." And before we get started talking about that, I did want to just mention, remind everyone, if you if you like my channel, if you enjoy my work, I'm not to get rich off of this, but getting support help me continue. Not spending a huge amount on equipment or anything, but I have spent some money on keeping this thing going. So if you want to support my channel, if you want to help me continue, you can go to subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great. And I would appreciate any support there. There will be links to that in the description. So having introduced everybody, having said that, I'm going to go ahead and put the poem up on the screen. Where is that? Oh, crud. Oh, share screen. There it is. Still getting used. Share application window, and this is the one. Okay, so Readjustment by C.S. Lewis. I thought that there would be a sunset splendor in being the last of one's kind. A topmost moment as one watched the huge wave curving over Atlantis, the shrouded barge turning away with wounded or Ilium burning. Now I see that all along I was assuming a posterity of gentle someone, however distant in the depths of time, who could pick up our signal, who could understand a story. There won't be. Between the new hominida and us who are dying, already there rises a barrier across which no voice can ever carry. For devils are unmaking language. We must let that alone forever. Uproot your loves one by one with care from the future, and trusting to no future, receive the massive thrust and surge of the many-dimensional, timeless rays converging on this small, significant dewdrop. The present that mirrors all. And here, let me turn off screen sharing because I forgot to do that at the end of the last one. And that is Readjustment by C.S. Lewis. So, Rachel, would you like to start us off as the guest tonight?
Well, I don't know as much about this poem. The one that we talked about previously was in a book in Pilgrim's Regress, right? And could you say more about, is this a standalone piece or is it part of a bigger composition?
As far as I know, it's on its own. I don't it's in his collection. It's in his the collection of poems by C.S. Lewis. But I don't know anything. I don't know anything about where else it comes from. It looks, I mean, it seems to stand well enough on its own. It doesn't seem to need a lot of context. So
well, I mean, in that it's sort of speaking to itself, isn't it?
That too, yes.
So I'm wondering whether it was part of something else, because I'm rereading Pilgrim's Regress right now, and that Lewis is moving back and forth between prose and poetry, and clearly but I mean, both he and Tolkien did that. That there are certain things you can express in prose more effectively, and there are certain things that you can express in poetry more effectively. And clearly, I mean, the obvious thing that he's expressing in this is this longing and sadness. And I saw a number of comments on the poem and the link that you sent me, that people being frustrated with him. How can he have such a depressing, despairing take on our ability to hope for the future? And so I was wondering when in his own arc of his conversion this came, because he seems to, the opening of it seems to be, if only we could have fame like the ancients. And there's a potential echo, I think, in things like Beowulf, where when Beowulf dies at the end, he's dead, and the people lamenting the fact that he's dead say, he had fame, but fame only exists so long as people remember you. So the poem the readjustment starts out there, but the way it ends, and the whole title of it, if that's his title, suggests this is a sort of humbling of your longing for grandeur, and
adjusting your expectations.
Right, that you're adjusting your expectations, and if you're in the, that ending with the present is finding yourself fully in the present mirrors everything else, right? So it reminds me of T.S. Eliot in the quartets, right, where you're trying, and I think Eliot and Lewis and some of the others were reading some of the same things at the time, that they're worrying about time, and they're worrying about the reality of the passage of time. And so I was hoping you knew a little bit more about the compositional context, because he's clearly gesturing towards lots of different conversations. And the last part of the image that I got from that, it's in that dewdrop that mirrors all, that there's like a jewel of water that contains, in fact, the whole of creation. So he's playing. It's a love. I was glad when you gave me the option to talk about this one, because he's obviously playing with a lot of very powerful images, and hopefully we can talk through a number of them.
Well, and it's there is a certain element of like a longing for fame or longing to be remembered, but it's not. It seems to me it's not just that. It's wanting to know that not so much fame as just that you will be understood, that there will be people after you who carry the same story forward.
Yes, well, I mean, I'm saying fame. Sorry, not in the sense of sort of celebrity now, that you're wanting to have loads of Twitter followers or but fame and fame in the grand sense of, you're remembered, and you end your life heroically, which is, it seems to me, what he's saying. It's like the splendor of this last, you being the last that's carrying out this story, and that without someone to tell the story after, that moment is. Yes, I agree with you.
But what was honestly, when I found this one, not that long ago, because I had read it in his collection of poems, but I actually hadn't marked it, and then I was just browsing around for other C.S. Lewis poetry online, and I found this one, and then I found that it was indeed in that collection of poems. But what caught my attention this time was that phrase, "For devils are unmaking language," and I'm just like, well, I can see that happening right now, and it's there have been a few times like this where with C.S. Lewis and with Chesterton, with some of their poems, where I see something they say and I'm like, that was already happening then?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did you see then? Because I mean, okay, I guess it seems like it was happening then, but man, it's accelerated in a way that I don't think they could have guessed. Go ahead.
I was just going to point out before that, I know I've expressed to you I had a few problems with the poem, I think because I was trying to get a literal understanding of who the narrator was. But starting that stanza, between the new hominidae and us who are dying already, it seems to me he's basically saying the next generation. Is that a fair interpretation of, he's creatively saying that with the new hominidae?
I thought the hominidae is purposeful, saying these little men, these small characters that are coming after us, because he has that argument about the men without chests and the abolition of man, right? So I took it in that context.
Yeah, and it also fits in with the idea, which I think, which a lot of people throughout history have held, and in our generation, it's kind of been reversed, that like those who came before us were obviously greater men than us. Like we are the lesser sons of these heroes, and in our day that's been reversed. And I don't think I was ever so silly as to think that obviously we are better than all the people who came before us. But I'm kind of more leaning towards maybe we are the lesser sons of greater men. I really am starting to lean that way more, and it's kind of, it's frustrating, and it's like, well, what's coming after us is and obviously that's a large part of what this is about.
Which ties into that second line, there rises a barrier across which no voice can ever carry, and then follows with the line that you pointed out, for devils are unmaking language. I don't know if... Go ahead.
So,
go ahead.
With the line, I think there's a barrier. That barrier. I mean, this again. I'm obviously thinking in context, because that's one of the things that Lewis is doing with the poem, right? He's trying to say, unless we have this context of reception, there's nothing. Nobody understands, and that barrier, that ability even to read the poem, even to put capture all of the allusions that he's making to Arthur and Homer and I have to put my glasses on. And I haven't memorized it like Zach Long.
Atlantis was the first one.
Atlantis, I mean, the Atlantis, Arthur, Ilium. I mean, he's not giving you any explanation of what those references are, and so that barrier becomes greater and greater when the whole repertoire of stories is no longer available, and nobody will understand what you're talking about. You have to have like tons of footnotes, and even then, because you have to explain it so laboriously, it can't sing anymore.
It's like explaining a joke. Like if you tell a joke and then you have to like explain how the joke works, by the time you're done, there's no joke anymore.
Right.
And it's go ahead, Travis.
I was just going to say, it's like a professor of mine in college. I remember him kind of losing it one day because nobody knew anything about the Bible, and it was imperative that you understand the Bible to understand Western literature.
Right.
And like that's basically being lost with this generation because they didn't grow up in church.
Well, so I just gave a talk that Zach Log knows about, which was on the great books of the Western tradition, or what I was calling it was great books of the Middle Ages and how to read them. And it was for the Ramsay Center of Western Civilization, for the study of Western civilization in Sydney in Australia. And what I set it up so that people would expect me to be talking about the great book series, like the Great Books of the Western World that was edited at Chicago, although not as part of the faculty's practice, and compared it with lists of, quote, great books from medieval curricula. But the thing is, hovering behind all of that was there is actually one great list of books that is the anchor of Western civilization, and it's the Bible, right? And what was interesting about the Great Books of the Western World, the Chicago edited collection, is they chose to leave the Bible out in 1952 because they assumed everybody would have one, right? And so last 60 years of that assumption is no longer even realistic. Or is it? I mean, the Bible is still, you go to the bookstore and there's still more Bibles than there are any other book.
Well, it's for one thing, like, it's not like, this problem is happening at several different scales. Like, because another guest we had on one time, and I hope he can come back again. He did talked about a Lovecraft poem with us. Was Jeffro Johnson, who published a book with Castalia House, and his book was Appendix N, and that was, and it was about the fantasy and early 20th century fantasy and science fiction that influenced the creators of Dungeons and Dragons. And he said, like, even at, like, for most fantasy science fiction readers today don't know any of these things, like, completely unfamiliar with them, and this is what all these later things are based on. And so, like, even at that level, like, things are being cut off, and it's hard to know what to make of it. It's like, is it like, you could come up with a couple of explanations. You could quite easily come up with the conspiratorial, they're trying to destroy all of this explanation. I regrettably can't dismiss that. I wish I could say
they are. But the real question is this the first time that's ever happened?
Well, the other thing is, it's all, if this is the first time, you'd have to do it on purpose. Because before
they have done it on purpose over and over and over again. That was part of the point of my talk, right? And that I was reading out these lists of books from the Middle Ages, and some of them were commentators on scripture. Some of them were the sort of the classics, right, that they used to learn Latin in the 12th century, and rhetorical books and things like that. The medicine and the law. So one of the lists was the bestsellers in the first 50 years of print. There have been very deliberate exercises of obliterating lists.
Well,
you're
okay,
not switching to this. I mean, the Reformation is a giant exercise in obliterating lists, including taking some of the books of the Bible out, right, that had been considered part of the list, and that transformed the tradition massively. It's like Travis, your professor was worrying about people not reading the Bible. How many of them knew the Wisdom of Solomon? If they're Protestants, they won't even know that it's a book.
Yeah, I grew up, I was raised in a Protestant church. I converted to Catholicism a few years ago, at least partly because of the influence of one John C. Wright. And
I'm getting a hint of who you guys follow.
But I had read when I was much younger. I know that sounds weird coming from me. I'm older than I look. But I had read when I was much younger. I read my way through the whole Protestant Bible. I still haven't read much at all of the Apocrypha, and I should get to that. I am aware of that as a minor.
It's not as many books, right? And they're fairly short. But for my purposes, as Zachlog knows, they're the books that take out the tradition of wisdom, right? The particularly therefore the devotion to the Virgin Mary, and so and that was a deliberate choice to get rid of those books. So there have been a number of other efforts. That my point about in my talk was the list that Adler and Hutchins came up with for the great books of the Western world in 1952 was consciously and it's like consciously skewed to the modernity, and every list makes a particular kind of argument and leaves out whole other elements of what, if you were doing it strictly as an exercise in history, you would say, look, people have been reading all of these other books, and they used to be the central characters in the civilization. Arthur, right? There's a whole repertoire of Arthurian legends from the 12th century to the 15th century that most people now never hear of. They hear Mallory, right, because they get the last one, but they don't get all of the other romances unless they're, in literature, in specialist medieval literature courses. And those were the popular stories of the day.
Well, and the other thing, because I said, like, there's the more conspiratorial explanation. There's also the less deliberate explanation, which is that, like, today we have all these different forms of media. We have, publishers just, cranking out books at a bizarre, kind of weird rate. And, like, I've heard that in Shakespeare's day, a single person could read, like, all of the, significant books that had been, collected in his lifetime. Like, and today you can't even read.
People in the 12th century didn't believe they could read everything. That's a fiction.
Okay, well, and this is why we have a historian on. But I mean, today, like,
it's in this was in my lecture too. It's in Ecclesiastes, for goodness sake. Of the making of many books there is no end, and much study is affliction of the flesh. Don't worry about it.
But like today, you can't even. One person couldn't even read all the books published in a year in their entire lifetime. And
but
so, like, there's also
been a surfeit. There's always been more than one human being could absorb, and so a few books get read by everybody, and most books get read by very few.
Well, right. And that's what. Travis, were you gonna?
No, I was just agreeing and saying right, and Rachel had said about, those Arthurian stories were the stories of their day, and I think that's sort of the point. We end up with the stories of our day, and certain things get lost in taking to that new. And I think that fits with the poem, what we're talking about, this barrier across which no voice can ever carry, this barrier between the generations. Whether you talk about the generation gap between your grandparents and grandchildren, or parents and children, or generations within literature, there's always going to be this gap where you try to understand, but there's always going to be things that don't get through.
But then, like we said, there's the thing of, devils are unmaking language. And, like, if you look at things from the early 20th century, like, pretty much all of the authors, from back then say, several things that are going to eventually get them kicked out of the schools, because, these are things you're not allowed to say anymore. And, you try and, like, even just the simple basic terms like marriage and men and women, like,
that's my opening to say Milo's leading the straight pride parade tomorrow.
He is a strange character. You've talked with him personally. I haven't. I've only seen him through his writing.
I've more than talk with him personally. I've written about him extensively for the last 3 years.
But yeah, what was
You were talking about marriage. So again, I think that the concern is real, and I don't want to minimize it, right? But I also want to contextualize it, saying what you were saying, the generational question is always there, right? It's like, why don't people read the things that I read when I was growing up? And it's a great joy to parents and grandparents when their children do read the things that they read growing up, because then they can get that connection. But there's so many things that I don't even know what my parents read growing up, because they never mentioned them. I wouldn't even know whether to look, right? If I had their library, maybe I'd look at the books they have, but maybe they checked them out from the library and took them back. So I would never know, because you're always, when you're born, your parents have been alive for 20, 25, 30 years, and they've been reading, if they're readers, they've been reading all that time. And that, that barrier of simply suggesting to read the book is it's innocent, but it can have a massive effect that you never learn what your parents even knew.
Yeah, there's actually another poem I did over a year ago. It was Rudyard Kipling's Recessional, and there's a line in there that is kind of hits the same theme and really punched me in the gut when I was doing that one because it's lest we forget, and I look at art like I think maybe I'm flattering myself, but I think I'm better than most people of my age on this. But there is so much that even I have, never connected to that my parents, took for granted. And it's really, frustrating and painful. And on the other side of that, I have two little boys, and I in some ways I don't know how to hand on to them the things that were important to me, and it's it's really frustrating and it's really scary, and I don't. Hi.
Joy. Well, but you kind of can't, right? You can't. It's like you might maybe have. You might have the books that you grew up with and be able to hand them on, but they're. I'm sorry. Somebody else talk while she finishes.
Travis. Travis, did you have anything?
I guess a thought that comes to me is, yeah, I mean, I've had that realization that you can't really pass it all on. I mean, you can give a general sense. I mean, I was just back in Pennsylvania hanging out with my nieces, and I grew up on a farm, and my one niece's father grew up on the farm with me, and he's passed, and so there's this sense of trying to pass some of that on to her. And we spend some time on the farm, but she will never know what that means in any context that I or my brother knew it. Even though she walks in the same places and I say, we played here or we play there, it's going to be a completely different experience for her. Her language for it's going to be different. I mean, going to the farm for her, she calls it farm camp when they come to the farm for a week, which is a very city term because she's from the city. To give it language, that's her language for it. So.
And I forgot what I was saying. Yes.
I think that comes down to, I mean, that's similar to what he says about, for devils are unmaking language, we must let that alone forever. Like sort of this acceptance that we can't change the fact that things are changing and that things are going to be different for this next generation, or whatever that may be.
And one thing with the closing of the poem, because like Rachel said, starting off, a lot of people say this is depressing, this is bleak. Why is C.S. Lewis writing this? This isn't the kind of thing we expect of him. But there is, and there definitely is that element. I'm not denying that. But I think if you're paying attention, and especially if you've read other things by C.S. Lewis, I think there's more hope than there seems in the last couple of lines, because he says we can't there's other works of his where he says like we can't influence the future that much. Like the future is to us just an idea, and if we try and focus on that too much, that leads directly to us making some terrible decisions. We have to focus on living our lives to the best we can right here and right now. And like oh crud.
Which is the point of the poem, right? He's saying, I mean, that's why it sort of, it's a good poem because it sort of drags you along and then subverts itself at the end, right? It's like, and that's the whole point of the readjustment, that what you want is you think you're going to go out in this blaze of glory and imagine yourself as, I mean, he's also imagined himself in something like the preface to Milton, I think it is, when he's talking about being a Christian, and isn't it great having an actual Christian to read the story with? He feels like a dinosaur. And what you were saying earlier about how he all the stuff that he's saying all seems to be current, like the sorts of struggles that we're having in academia right now. Well, yes, they're not. He describes them in the 20s and 30s and 40s as if they were now. That you would be the last Christian reading Milton, right, or something like that. Wouldn't it be wonderful that you would be going out in this magnificent blaze? But the reality of it is that everyone's always only in the present, but it's the mirror of all, right? And so the readjustment doesn't come until the very last line, but it's a very powerful move that he makes, because the idea that the present mirrors all of this is happening in the present, in the sense that those stories still exist for us to read. The tradition that we're trying to participate in only exists insofar as we're participating in it now. So it's actually a very hopeful poem, but you have to get to the end of it first.
Yeah, and it's there was and I remember it's kind of weird because I've read a lot of C.S. Lewis's works, but it's been a good while, and so I can say this was something he said, but I can never place what book off the top of my head. And so, like, I remember at some point he says basically that, like, focusing on the future is, where almost all sin lies, because you're always looking forward to something rather than looking at what is now. And the other thing, where if you're trying to, like, if you're looking to the future, if you're looking at what's coming, and that's where all of your focus is, that's also a very easy way to end up doing truly horrific things now. And honestly, kind of weirdly, the best literary example of that I can call to mind right now is from the graphic novel Watchmen. Are you familiar with that?
I've read parts of it. I'm not totally familiar, but yes, a little bit.
Yeah, and it's
I've read it.
And Ozymandias has this grand plan that he's going to remake humanity. He's going to end war. But to do this, he's got to kill 10, 20 million people, which, now that I think about it, I hadn't made this comparison before, but that sounds an awful lot like, every communist government ever. But, he has this...
Say that again. It sounds an awful lot like who?
Like every communist government ever.
Well, I mean, every utopian plan ever, which is always the problem.
But and he has this grand plan, but, like, we're only human, and however smart you are, you're only human. The future is out of your hands. There's only what you actually did, and it looks like at the end this one tiny thing went wrong with his plan. This one tiny bit of information leaked out. His plan is done. His plan is not going to do what he thought it was going to do, and all he actually did was kill tens of millions of people. And
right,
that's what looking to the future will do to you, instead of looking at where am I right now and what is the right thing to do right now. And I'm done for the moment. Go ahead.
So he has some of that is in That Hideous Strength, which if you want a sort of spooky take on the way academia is as it was then, the first several chapters in That Hideous Strength are, the way department meetings go and how people agree to things, and the group coheres and such. And of course, in the novel, what they decide to do is have actually they're being lured away. The main character is being lured away to work in this institute, which I forget what it means, but the acronym is NICE, NICE, and it some kind of
National Institute for Coordinated Experiments or something.
There
like
you
that.
go. Nice. Right. And all of it, the giveaway is that, of course, it's being controlled by demons. But the, for a long time in the story, you think it just sounds like, yet another social science institute that's going to control the future for us. So we know that Lewis was very concerned about that kind of social engineering exercise. I do wonder what the devils are unmaking language, because that's a regular theme for him as well. That if you're not focused on God, your speech becomes satanic. He was wrote about Milton. He wrote about the demons and that hideous strength that you communication breaks down and no one can speak. Never mind the barrier across the generations. No one can speak to each other at all, because language doesn't mean anything anymore at all. But that it comes from that desire to control that both he and Tolkien were very interested in arguing against. It's theological.
Well, another part of that is like, a big part of Christianity, Jesus, who we say is God on earth, he said, "I am the truth." Like, not I speak the truth, but I am the truth. And and you can look at other religions in comparison with this. Christians have elevated people who die because they will not say something false about this. They refuse to even save their own lives to say something that they know is false. And if that is not your goal, if that is not your focus, if what you're saying is not an effort to speak truth, then eventually all it will be is an effort to get your way, and
right.
other people are just things you manipulate in order to get your way. And we all do that some. All of us are guilty of that to some degree, but it's also a question of your focus, and you have.
I don't know, but what are you getting up to? What do you have not explained?
Like, even if you fail at the ideal, having the ideal matters.
Yes.
And it's also that, what is the I think it was Oscar Wilde said hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue, or
yes, the sense that you ought to be telling the truth.
Yeah, and like, you can point to today and in the past, Christian, prominent Christians who have failed in any number of ways, and have said you ought to do this and then done the opposite. And at the same time, and depending who you're looking at, depending what they did, sometimes it you kind of have to discount them quite a bit, but sometimes it's just they know the ideal, they know what they ought, and you still can't live up to it, and that's just part of being human. I don't know where I'm going with this. I think I've run my mouth for a while and I've lost my way.
Okay, so no, but I was thinking as you were talking that go back to people who think of themselves as Christian but behave in ways other than that they speak. And you all clearly read Costelli House books and read John C. Rice. You must know who Vox is. What he talks about all the time, the importance of your yes being yes and your no being no, and speaking the truth. And I've obviously considered that my whole life as a Christian, but I'm becoming so aware now of how important that is. It's like speaking the truth as truth also includes, in the context of our poem, saying the things, admitting to the things in your life that you're not as, that don't shed glory.
Wait, could you?
So
I'm sorry.
the devil. You have to. I mean, what Lewis does in the poem is you want to go out in this blaze of sunset splendor, right, and to have things that are worthy of renown and things that you'd be proud to have people sing about you and your life. But the problem for Christians is that we're often doing things that we don't want anybody to know about, and if you want to live truthfully, you have to say them. You have to admit to having said them or done them or failed in doing the things that you would wish you had. Otherwise, you fall into hypocrisy all the time. It's very, very hard to be I am the truth, right? Because that means that you have to be sunlit at all times, being willing for people to know who you are, which is, I guess, an opposite way of saying it's like you have to have people, you have to be willing to let the world see you, even when you don't want it to.
There's a kind of weird problem there because it seems like there's the pull to be honest, to be open. There's also like the theological, in church term scandal. And there's that problem too, and you don't want to give scandal, and like trying to say, I have failed in this way. I need to be honest about who I am. I have failed in this way. I do not want to give scandal, create scandal for the church. And it's like, well, what are my real motives here, and what's really going on? And one positive thing, and it's like I said, I didn't grow up in the Catholic Church, and one thing that's kind of fascinating to learn coming in is like doing regular confession, and there is this system where you are going to at least to one person say, I have failed in this way, in this way. And there's, confronting that on a regular basis, it makes it a lot harder to hide from yourself. And there is something powerful in that, too. What was the... Hello?
I'm here.
Okay, sorry, I just heard a kathunk. I didn't know what that was.
Well, okay, I have more. I always have more. So I, thinking about that. So, I usually work best. I've been thinking about why morality comes in allegory and story a lot at the moment, because I'm thinking about, well, one, I was rereading Pilgrim's Regress, and Lewis is obviously big on allegory and he uses it in many of his works, and he wrote a book about it, The Allegory of Love. So why is it that morality is something that is explored best through personification? I've been thinking about that, but it's also explored through when you're actually put to the test in social situations. And so there, Milo has a Telegram channel, but he also has a chat, which is a smaller group of, it's like 700 people now because he let in a whole bunch of new ones. That's a stream. It's a more interactive than the channels, right? Because the channels are posts with, you can put comments on, and the chat is the gazillion people all talking together. So Milo decided, because he's Milo and we're worrying about straight pride and the relations between the sexes, have Tuesdays be Sharia Tuesdays when the women couldn't talk at all. Because the men need some rest from us. And we're like, what? We didn't do anything. So, but in order to do this, we're most of us perfectly willing to go along with the game, but the women were a little mischievous the first time and first spammed the chat with a bunch of stickers when we left. And then we're watching the men, right? And as far as I was aware, the men in the group knew that those of us who are following Milo tend to agree with Milo on things like women should stay out of the chat on Tuesday. And the men started talking trash about women. It was frustrating for me and sad because there were some of the men in the chat who were saying things who I didn't expect to say anything like that, right? And there's this little group of women who are like watching from another chat and talking to each other, and I got upset, right? I'm like, but we're the good women. We're the ones that believe that it's good to have the men separated from the women every so often. And these guys are saying these evil, we should not talk to them. And it I did a blog post about this called The Game of Moo, about how hard it was this first time watching the men need to talk about the things that they found frustrating with women. And the women, we'd all just turn, it's like the whole chat turned into this one great example of why women have difficulty in our conversations with ourselves, because some of the women, with this, yeah, let's Game of Moo. Some of them went, oh my gosh, they're behaving like women. They're all like catty and icky. I want nothing to do this. And it was such a good, because when you're around Milo, these sorts of things always happen, example of how hard it is to behave even the way you wish you could in the sort of social moment. And that, I mean, that's obviously one of the things that Lewis played with in that hideous strength, how people so want to be part of the inner circle and so want to be going along with what everybody else is saying, and that temptation to want to be approved is the straight road to vice, right? Because you're so anxious about being part of whatever social situation that you're finding yourself in. I'm trying to figure out how that fits with our poem.
Maybe I can bring it back a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know. Wow. I think while both of you and Sean were talking, it just kept coming back to me, this surge of the many-dimensional timeless rays converging on this small, significant dewdrop. This present that mirrors all. But in a sense, we are the dewdrop, like this perceived identity that we exist in right at this moment. And a many-dimensional timeless ray certainly sounds very heavenly and sublime at the same time. And so it seems to suggest sitting in the light and in this moment in order to know how to live and how to act, and to let both the past where Arthur and Homer existed and the future that we are trying to achieve something great.
That's lovely. That's the sense that there's the sunlight. We start with sunset and we end up with this image of a rainbow, in fact, right? Because the dewdrop is what rainbows are made of. Right. And that that many-dimensional timeless rays converging there, that's a sunlight image, right? So they're all converging on the dewdrops, and then that is the brilliance of the rainbow.
I think that's also and as I said, I can never pin down where I got something from Lewis, but I do seem to remember at some point him saying, like, the present is the moment, the present is where time meets eternity. And that seems to be a little bit what he's talking about there. That the moment here is where everything has to come together, one moment at a time. And you can't, what's past is done. You can't change that. And you can't control the future. All you have is what you do right now, how you live right now, and trying to do honorably in that moment. And it's like I said earlier, there definitely are bleak and frustrating elements to this poem, but there is also that element of hope at the end if you're looking for it. So, well, let's see. I don't know. We've been going for almost an hour.
That's a good interval.
Travis, did you have any other big things you wanted to say about this one? Did we cover most of your?
Yeah, I think so. I can't think of anything else. Something small is just a line, however distant in the depths of time. That's just a beautiful line for me. That's all I've got.
So I think with the what Travis you said beautifully about the dewdrop and the raindrop and the sunlight. I think also when I was wittering on about how to behave well, right, and giving my example, even as I was narrating it for you, I lost focus, right, and that one of the things that is very powerful in giving us strength to behave well in the moment is to remember who we are, right? And remember that we are the, in Christian terms, giving back at light, right? And I think that maybe the dewdrop image that he's playing with there, it mirrors all we should be mirroring God in our attention and in our behavior, and that helping hold that in your mind and in your heart is one of the ways, hopefully, that means we will behave well in the moment.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
my dog does not. But she's Joy, so she gets. You're always surprised by Joy when you're doing.
no logos. That was what Owen ends up yelling at his dog. Anyway.
My dog. I don't know about Owen's dog. He's got a stuffed bear. I've got Mary, right? My dog has lots of logos. It's not like George.
So, that reminds me, one thing I forgot to mention when I was introducing Rachel at the beginning, she also has a history series on unauthorized.tv that you can sign up for. I believe the first episode is available for free, but the rest you have to subscribe to Unauthorized to catch that. And so that would also be something people should look into.
And there's a blog for it, so you can get a sense of what the episodes are about from the blog is unauthorizedmedievalhistory.blogspot.com, and there's study guides for each episode that are public on there. So you even before you sign up for the rest of it, you can see what the topics were.
Okay. So, thank you to both of you for joining us tonight. It's been interesting. It's been fun. And as usual, it wanders around a lot. Thank you, Rachel. And I hope you get to join us again another time. And God be with you.
Me. And with you.
Okay.
Right.
And, where's the button? There we go.